Hi, welcome to this video in the series about how to live well. So, would it all just work better if only people would just stick to the rules? Keeping rules is one way in which people believe that life can be made to work well. And at the moment in this pandemic, we're all getting used to keeping rules, and they are an ever changing and hugely complex set of rules that we live by currently. So at the moment in the UK, you can visit a zoo, but you can't go and visit your daughter, and she can't come and visit you in your house, unless, of course, you pay her to clean your toilet, in which case she counts as a cleaner and she can come in. Rules are often very complex, but living by the rules is a model for life that some people think will work. But the problem with rules is that they can be very rigid and they can be very inflexible. Very rapidly, we come up against situations in which the rules just don't seem to apply. And that's not just because we're being selfish and thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me. So take, for example, a fairly straightforward rule that you'd think would always be so. Always tell the truth. What if a murderer were to ask you where his next victim was hiding and you knew the answer? That wouldn't be a good idea to be always telling the truth. So, yeah, okay, there are exceptions that prove the rule, and as every lawyer knows, you have to be continually adding clauses to cover unforeseen circumstances, more nuanced situations. So rules are tricky. The more rules you have for life, the more unbending and ill-fitting it all becomes. Steve Chalke, in his book Being Human, wrote about this, and he said, rules codify the past. They're designed to tell us how to deal with what happened yesterday. They are a map of the past. That's not to say that they're not good and they're not helpful. They are. They're definitely good and helpful. But we can understand, can't we, that rules come into place regarding, for example, the cladding on tower block walls. And that's an example of rules codifying the past. An event happened, we changed the regulations to try to ensure that similar tragedies don't happen again. So it's not that rules are a bad thing, and we should definitely keep them. But just like maps, no book of rules is ever completely up to date. And just like maps that are not the reality of the place, a rule book is just a helpful guide to the way ahead. They're not useless, they're very useful, but they do have limits. Are they there to help us live well? Are they the best way to help us live well? I'm not so sure. The other problem with this model for life that some people hold on to very tightly is that living by the rules gives you a huge sense of entitlement. Rule keepers often suffer from this sense of entitlement. Well, I did this and I did that, and therefore X and Y should happen. So, for example, I pay my taxes, I don't break the law, I deserve free healthcare, a decent pension. And it's not that you're not a deserving, decent, upright, rule-keeping citizen. But for all of us, whether we're rule keepers or we're rule breakers, here is one universal, uncomfortable truth. Life is not fair. This is one of the hardest darn things to accept. Life is not fair. You may be devout, generous, exemplary, a decent human being, but your child, wife, mother, might still die in a tragic road accident. And that's pretty rubbish. So in response to this, you might be tempted to say, well, if that's the case, what's the point of being a rule keeper? Well, there's a whole load of very good reasons for being a rule keeper. It makes life better for everyone, even though it doesn't guarantee us immunity from hardship or tragedy. So just hold that thought, park it for a moment, because I'm going to come back to that what's the point question. First, just a little bit more about this sense of entitlement, because I think that as human beings, whether we believe in God or not, we have this sense of entitlement that the universe ought to pay us back when we behave well. Other religions express it as karma. So we're tempted when we think about God, as Eugene Peterson once put it, he said that if we keep a code of conduct, then we are in charge. And we move God off the field and onto the judge's podium. So we keep the rules and we expect God, him or her, to grade our performance and to applaud us accordingly. Not surprisingly, we get miffed if God doesn't seem to notice. It's that same paradox, that same paradigm going on in our head. If I do this, then God ought to do X, Y, or Z. See previous point about life being unfair. So what's the point of God if he doesn't change that? If keeping the rules don't influence what happens? Well, it's a good question. But before we think about what's the point of God, let's just think about the character and the nature of this God that you have in mind. Because what if God is not the stern judge waiting to rap you over your knuckles for your lack of time in church or your fondness for cupcakes? What if God is not a measly superpower waiting to catch you out and tell you off? What difference would it make if you saw God as a loving parent who's provided this incredible richness of people and creation and this planet and wants us to enjoy it all? If that's who God is, then he doesn't actually need to have a point, because being connected to this God would be enough to make us happy. So to take a human example, if you had a good relationship with your mum or your dad, you probably wouldn't ever find yourself asking the question, what's the point of having a mum or a dad? It would be an odd question to ask. If you have a loving relationship with your mum or your dad, that is the point. You don't need them to have a point for their existence. They're not there to grade you or feed you or remind you to clean your teeth, although of course they might have at one time done all of those things. But the point of their existence, the meaning in your connection with them, is all about being loved, and that's enough. Yes, so if God is like a parent who really loves me, wouldn't he keep me from harm? Well, yes, he would, and he absolutely does. Depends how you define harm, because God promises that whatever harm does befall us, he promises us that it won't ever be enough to separate us from his love for us. Bad things, unfair things will happen. And the reason why those things happen, well, that's the subject for another whole video. But the point about God is that he's not there to grade our performance. He's there to love us, flaws and all. He's on our side. He's for you. Do you remember that line in the movie where, which the very well known, I can't remember the name of the movie, but you had me at hello. Do you remember that line? Well, God says to you, the moment you came into being, he took one look at you and said, you had me at hello. You're amazing. I'm mad about you. That's what God says about you. And that kind of acceptance has got nothing to do with rules. You see, when we live by moralism, which is just a fancy word for keeping the rules, we're constructing a way of life in which we have this wrong picture of God, in which me, myself, I, all by myself, I can earn the acceptance that I think I deserve. And when we do that, we overlook the fact that we've already been offered that acceptance. See, if I can keep the rules, I have no need of a saving God. I just need an approving God, one who'll tell me how well I'm doing and reward me appropriately by guaranteeing me protection from punishment or disaster. But there are a lot of flaws in that way of thinking. Firstly, I can't keep the rules anyway, so it's never going to work. Turns out, actually, I do need a saving God. Secondly, the rules don't cater for every situation, so I'm not going to know how to behave in some circumstances. Thirdly, the God the Bible describes is not a God who is the mean judge. He is a saviour. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. Yes, the Bible actually says that. So if keeping the rules is not going to guarantee you a safe and happy life, let's just come back to that point that I said I'd come back to. Why would you keep them? Well, apart from the fact that it's good for everybody else, if we can just agree on a few things, e.g. which side of the road we're all going to drive on. The reason we might make an effort to live by the rules, and the reason why it might help us live well, is because the rules God gives us are designed to help us live well. So take, for example, the Ten Commandments. They describe a way of life, which turns out to be the way to life, life in all its fullness. You see, we think about the Ten Commandments and we think they are a set of rules, and we forget or we overlook that before God gave the Ten Commandments, he gave a long preface before them. And he said words to the effect of, look, I know you're going to screw up, but here's a way of life that will help you thrive and it will help society thrive. Just do your best, okay? When you mess up, and you are going to mess up, you're going to need forgiveness and restoration. And I'm really into that. So the rules are not some tough set of requirements set by a demanding deity who insists that we keep them before he blesses us. Instead, they are an indication of an ideal way of life, offered us by a God who created us and who knows how we are likely to function best. This God says, trust me on this, follow me, live this way, and life will generally go better. If you don't lie or cheat or steal or murder, if you live life at a less than frenetic pace so that you make sure you rest properly, if you have in essence a respectful relationship with other people, e.g. your parents, if you don't spend all your time envying other people's lives, then guess what? Your life will be enriched and you will be more peaceful. This is the way of life that Jesus summed up when he summed up all of the 10 Commandments in the 2 commandments. love God, and love other people as you love yourself. So love is the summary of the law, of all those rules. God, who loves you, would love your life to go well for you. Would you believe it? Well, would you? So the next in this series of videos about living well is going to look at whether or not we can live well by just doing what feels good. Thanks for listening.